At 4 a.m. on July 24, 2025, the USS Harry S. Truman floated silently through the Gulf of California. It looked like any other Navy carrier, but this ship wasn't here for diplomacy. 50 nautical miles east, cartel boats armed with stolen launchers and modified drones rushed over, and their mission? To strike fast, hit hard, and disappear. But it wasn't so easy. They had no idea they were heading into a trap. This time, the Navy wasn't alone. Below deck, something unexpected awaited. So what really happened that morning? And why didn't the cartel see it coming? Join us as we unravel how the United States Marines tricked cartels into a stunning defeat. Mexican cartels have long been a fishbone in the neck of the U.S. military. Although both the Mexican and U.S. government are trying their best to fend off this army of criminals and reach a fair enough compromise for both countries, it appears that the U.S. is on the receiving end of the criminal activities. It's quite hard to imagine that two countries separated by a fence could be at loggerheads over jurisdiction for so long, but it's also hard, if not impossible, to overlook the fact that many deaths have been caused by the continuous transportation of drugs from Mexico to the U.S. The tension had been building for months. With land borders fortified by walls and patrols, the cartels pivoted to maritime routes, funneling fentanyl that killed over 82,000 Americans last year alone. Whispers of corruption ran deep, suspicions that Mexican police and military units were turning a blind eye or worse, aiding the syndicates with tips and safe passage. While it cannot be denied that Mexico has tried to solve the cartel puzzle, they have failed in their attempts because, unlike the U.S. that does not negotiate with terrorists, Mexico prefers to employ diplomacy in dealing with the issue, a method that has consistently failed. The Trump administration officially designated 8 Latin American cartels, including 6 from Mexico, as foreign terrorist organizations for their major roles in drug smuggling and human trafficking into the United States. The move marks a major escalation in the administration's efforts to cripple the cartels, as an FTO designation grants the administration access to enhanced counterterrorism authorities, such as the ability to launch covert operations authorized by the president. The FTO designation came only days after the Mexican Senate approved the presence of the U.S. Army's 7th Special Forces Group to conduct joint training with Mexico's elite Naval Marine Corps. During his address to Congress earlier this year, President Donald Trump did not mince words about the threat drug cartels pose. The cartels are waging war on America, and it's time for America to wage war on the cartels. His statement marks the clearest indication so far that the new administration is serious about confronting the cartels and follows a series of escalating actions. As mentioned, the U.S. does not negotiate with terrorists, so when it became unbearable, the U.S. struck, and it struck in an unexpected way. To send a clear message to the cartels that it was done talking, the U.S. positioned one of its most powerful aircraft carriers, the USS Harry S. Truman, just off the Pacific coast. But the cartels, drunk with years of unchecked power and used to the hesitation from Mexican authorities, saw the move as mere bluff. What happened next was completely shocking. Under the cover of a moonless night off the treacherous coast of Mexico, California, on July 24, 2025, hundreds of cartel fighters stormed toward the Pacific coast in a massive fleet of 55 vessels. 40 nimble speedboats armed with AK-47s and rocket-propelled grenades backed by 15 larger gunboats bristling with heavy machine guns. These weren't your average smugglers. They were a cartel armada composed of hundreds of battle-hardened fighters from the Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation syndicates, launching a brazen assault on the U.S. Navy patrol ship they considered bluff. The assault group thought the open sea was still their playground, as usual, a lawless highway for transporting fentanyl into America and causing chaos in the free country. But they couldn't be more wrong. What they didn't know was that a storm was brewing above and below the waves. 50 nautical miles away, the USS Harry S. Truman carrier group floated. Its decks were alive with FA-18 Super Hornets and MQ-9 Reaper drones ready to unleash precision hell on the first enemy to fall within its target range. The carrier wasn't there to show, it was there to remind anyone that challenging America might come at a deadly price. In the dead of night, at precisely 4 a.m., the calm waters off the Mexico-California border transformed drastically into a heavy tension that could be cut with a knife. This part of the sea was a vital strait, a lifeline for global oil trade, where billions in cargo flowed daily through narrow channels linking the Pacific to American ports. The slightest disruption here was capable of spiking fuel prices worldwide, sending ripples through world economies from one end of the world to another. But on this fateful night, the sea didn't serve as a regular trade route. It became a battlefield, one that would determine the fate of cartel lords and put them in their place. The brewing battle was destined to be tough because the assailants were no ragtag bandits. A cartel armada was about to face off against the U.S. million, and the 15 larger gunboats backing them were equipped with heavy machine guns capable of shredding holes from afar. As if they didn't have enough armory already, 20 advanced drones rigged with high explosive payloads hovered above, ready to strike from the skies with devastating accuracy. If you still think they were just simple traffickers, they were mistaken. They were a paramilitary force shifting from clogged land borders to the open sea, exploiting gaps where the border wall vanished into the waves. And facing this onslaught, the United States Navy, but not just the Navy. No one expected the USS Harry S. Truman to be anything more than a floating airbase. A fortress of steel, yes, but mostly planes, not boots on deck. But the cartels made one fatal assumption. The Truman was carrying more than the Navy. She was carrying firepower of a different breed. Marines. The USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Group stood as the command hub, with its nuclear-powered heart pumping life into a fleet of over 150 sailors and 500 Marines. From its vast decks, FA-18 Super Hornets and electronic warfare growlers waited to launch, providing aerial cover without exposing the carrier to direct fire. There were 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers flanking the scene. Bristling with Tomahawk missiles and close-in weapon systems, they were more than ready to unleash hell from a distance. 4 MQ-9 Reaper drones circled silently overhead, their sensors piercing the darkness to relay real-time intel. When the cartel fleet started closing in with engines roaring like muffled thunder, the Navy braced for a clash that would test both their steel and their resolve. The cartel, with their heavy infantry, somehow believed that they had the upper hand. But little did they know that America's response was already locked and loaded. As the clock struck 4:15 a.m., the 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers flanking the carrier drifted into the distance. It looked like they were fleeing, but they had another assignment in the battle. Minutes later, the still waters erupted into massive chaos. Like a tidal wave of fury, the army of drug traffickers surged forward with all their 55 vessels closing in on the American destroyers at breakneck speed. The smaller speedboats were ahead, and their engines roared as the fighters leveled their rifles and rocket-propelled grenades at the Navy hulls. The attack power was nothing short of terrifying, but that wasn't the real deal. The actual threat came from the 15 larger gunboats, which had their decks alive with heavy machine guns chattering relentlessly as bullets ricocheted off armored plating like angry hornets. The cartel fighters didn't hold back, not that they could even if they wanted to. They directly rammed their boats into the destroyer's flanks, sending shockwaves through the water with the impact. If the boats were any smaller, they may have been crushed by the impact. Cartel fighters leaped aboard in a frenzy, engaging the military in hand-to-hand combat. Razor-sharp machetes were swung, and shots were being fired at point-blank range. The fighters, in a rush of adrenaline, shouted in Spanish, their voices mixed with the crack of gunfire as they stormed the decks, with a single aim: to overwhelm the American crew in close quarters. One destroyer rocked violently as a cartel gunboat slammed its bow, allowing a dozen fighters to clamber over the rails. Hand-to-hand clashes broke out, fists and rifle butts flying in the dim glow of deck lights. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. Engines roaring like muffled thunder amid the pandemonium. But the Navy was ready. Although they were previously prepared for long-range battle, as they didn't expect their assailants to so brazenly climb onto the destroyers, it didn't take long to prepare other weapons, and the Marines were there precisely for that reason. Close-range weapon systems spun to life with a mechanical whine, and they unleashed torrents of depleted uranium rounds that shredded incoming drone swarms. The sleek, explosive-laden cartel drones that were on standby were finally deployed. They dived at Mach speeds, flying toward the ships with their payloads primed for maximum devastation. At this point, things appeared ugly for the Marines. One drone exploded mid-air, raining shrapnel that wounded 3 sailors. Another grazed a destroyer's radar mast, its blast killing one American outright in a flash of fire and debris, sending several spiraling harmlessly into the sea and putting them in an even worse situation. But the comeback was quick. While the melee combat was raging between Marines and cartel members, Navy teams executed pit maneuvers with surgical precision, ramming cartel boats off course and flipping them into the waves. To avoid drowning, the assailants leapt into the air, swinging their arms as they desperately tried to cling to the side of the destroyers. But the Marines wouldn't let that happen. They followed the attack by raining fire from behind bulkheads, their M4 carbines barking in controlled bursts that dropped fighters mid-leap. The cartel vessels that were still standing pressed hard, furthering their own attack. Their drones scored multiple hits that burnt off the paint from the destroyers and dented armor. But the layered defenses held. The fight turned visceral, and as waves crashed against hulls, knives flashed in the air, finding their way into flesh and bodies, tumbling overboard from the impacts. Yet the Marines' discipline shone, even through the smoke and screams. What began as a bold assault by the cartel had turned into a desperate gamble. The American counterstrike was brewing from afar, but they needed time, and so even as the sea boiled with wreckage, the line held, refusing to break. The initial clash had drawn blood, but America's response was as swift as it was unforgiving. While this battle was raging, the USS Harry S. Truman remained safely positioned miles offshore. The boss, who had been quiet the whole time, finally barked orders, commanding that the strike package be launched. Reaper first. Hornets on standby. In a matter of minutes, 4 MQ-9 Reaper drones lifted off, racing to join the fray. These unmanned predators were armed with Hellfire missiles and guided by real-time satellite feeds. They locked onto the cartel fleet stragglers, and with impeccable precision, unleashed strikes that lit the horizon like distant fireworks. The enemy was rendered helpless as the piece of the strike dealt a blow they didn't see coming. The toll was staggering. 180 cartel fighters lay dead or dying. 40 vessels were reduced to floating wreckage. Their drone swarms scattered like broken toys. But the victory didn't come without a cost. An American soldier, a Marine, fell to a stray rocket-propelled grenade during the melee, while 4 more suffered shrapnel wounds and a destroyer's radar array took minor damage, flickering offline briefly. At this point, the cartel had realized their error. This was no ordinary Navy, it was the Marine Corps. With no choice, the cartel retreated. Unfortunately, as the survivors scrambled ashore, American satellites tracked their every move. Heat signatures betrayed their retreat to a secondary base. The technical team transmitted the location of the second base to an unseen ally and guided them quietly to the precise position. But the cartels had no idea. All they could see was that the American destroyers were closing in on them. They didn't surrender, not that they could. They struck back with vengeance. Hours after the initial strikes, what remained of their armada regrouped. 55 vessels had been reduced to 15, but somehow their confidence remained. In the distance, a mix of battered speedboats and gunboats charged toward the American destroyers in a desperate second wave. This time, they didn't immediately go in for hand-to-hand combat. Fueled by rage and perhaps motivated by fentanyl profits, the fighters opened fire from afar, their heavy machine guns stitching the water with tracers. But just like the previous attack, the real horror came from above. Yes, the drones. The 20 drones had been reduced to the remaining 12, and all 12 of them, with high explosive warheads and swarm intelligence, dove-like kamikaze falcons, their payloads designed to punch through armored decks, were ready to rain hell again. In no time, the sea turned into a maelstrom of close-quarters fury. 2 cartel boats were over-motivated and rammed into the destroyers again. Fighters from both boats swarmed aboard in brutal hand-to-hand assaults. They screamed their mantra as knives flashed and AK-47s blazed in the confined chaos. After realizing their error and knowing there was no turning back, the carelessness of the cartel was visible now. Rather than dominance and strategy, they were filled with desperation. One U.S. destroyer shuddered as a cartel drone slammed into its superstructure, the explosion ripping through the destroyer, spreading a hail of shrapnel that wounded some sailors. One Marine gunner fell when he was unexpectedly struck by a cartel sniper's round, and that was only the second fatality from the U.S. troops. Remember the two Arleigh Burke-class destroyers flanking the carrier? They weren't carrying naval officers. They were carrying the war. Hidden in their steel bellies were U.S. Marines, locked, loaded, and waiting. When their moment came, they surged forward. The destroyer's vertical launch systems flared to life, belching fire as dozens of Tomahawk cruise missiles roared from their cells. They hugged the ocean's surface like hunting wolves, skimming low to avoid detection. Each missile was dialed into cartel gunboats with a sniper's precision, only faster, colder, and far more final. There was a brief silence, but that was only the calm before the storm. Explosions rocked the water as warheads detonated, splintering the hulls of boats and sending fighters tumbling into the churning foam. Meanwhile, under the cover of smoke and the technical coordination from the USS Harry S. Truman, Marine assault forces made their move. 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines hit the shore in a rolling thunder of AAV, 7 amphibious assault vehicles, and LCACs. Naval gunfire kept enemy heads down, while the Marines breached the port perimeter with lethal speed. Makeshift cartel towers, hastily rigged with machine guns, became coffins as Marine sniper teams, ghosts in the brush, took them down before they could even squeeze a trigger. Now the cartel armada were right in the middle of the storm. With the naval destroyers in front and the Marines behind, their attack effected direct hits on multiple vessels, reinforcing the morale of the military. High above, F-35Bs from Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 211, launched from USS America, striking cartel lookout towers and disabling radar systems. FA-18 Super Hornets from Truman screamed into action, their afterburners glowing like angry stars. Diving in coordinated waves, they dropped laser-guided bombs on cartel strongholds along the Mexican coast, identified through urgent intel feeds. Satellite imagery had pinpointed hidden bases, camouflaged warehouses stocked with fentanyl labs and weapon caches deep in cartel territory near Tijuana. One strike obliterated a command center, its subterranean bunker collapsing in a plume of dust and fire, burying dozens under tons of rubble. The deck became a battlefield of blood and brass, with hand-to-hand struggles echoing the raw intensity of pirate boardings from centuries past. Bullets whizzed, bodies collided, and the air reeked of cordite and fear as fighters grappled in the flickering emergency lights. But the Marines and Navy weren't about to despair. Resolve hardened. From the distant USS Harry S. Truman, coordinated drone strikes launched in retaliation. MQ-9 Reapers, armed with classified payloads, targeted cartel hideouts revealed by satellite tracking. One strike obliterated a Mexican coastal base, vaporizing 80 more fighters in a fireball that lit the horizon. To counter the drone swarm, the carrier deployed experimental laser weapons, high-energy beams from directed energy systems that fired the incoming threats mid-flight, their circuits melting in silent bursts of light. A controller reported that the target had been neutralized as the lasers danced across the sky like invisible swords. Just when it seemed all was lost for the cartel, the roar of FA-18 Super Hornets added to their misery. Missiles screamed down from above, tearing into the cartel boats that had almost reached striking range. Explosions lit up the strait as the tide turned in seconds. What had looked like a certain kill became a chaotic retreat. By nightfall, it was over. The drones were gone, turned to ash. The cartel vessels, scattered wrecks floating in silence. Who would have thought that a cartel armada armed with unbelievable firepower could be brought to its knees in less than 24 hours? What began as a brazen and bold assault quickly became a lesson in warfare and dominance. The cartel came, expecting to find a soft target, but found themselves face to face with the might of the Marine Corps. It was a message well sent. Thanks for watching. While you are still here, click on the link on your screen to check out another of our videos. See you there.